Hi folks, this is Scott Nolan. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Northern Virginia, and I'm going to talk to you about when you must identify yourself to the police, when you must provide them with some form of identification. I have a client who was just walking down the street. Unbeknownst to her, she was passing by a scene of a crime, I guess, and some police officers emerged from a building and asked her for her license. Now, note, she wasn't driving, she was just walking down the street. She was not certain whether or not she had to provide a license. And she asked them, "Do I have to give you my license?" They said, "Ma'am, would you please let us see your license?" Now, that's a clue. If you had to, they would tell you you have to. She decided she wasn't going to do it. She said, "No, I'm not going to give you my identification." They said, "Well, if you're not guilty, why wouldn't you tell us your name?" And she said, "Because I don't like the police." And they let her go. What else could they do? So, let's talk about when you have to and when you don't have to. There are two important cases or times in Virginia where you must provide a license. Number one, when you're driving a vehicle. If a police officer stops you, you must provide them with your license and your registration. Number two, if you're going to board an airplane. That's it. Those are the only times in Virginia you are required to identify yourselves. So there's several different instances that I want to talk about the particulars of. And the first is important because it's different in Virginia than in many other states. And that's what we call a consensual encounter. That is, you're just walking along and a police officer comes up to you and says, "Hey, could I have a word with you?" And there's nothing forceful about it. You're not under arrest. You're not being detained. As far as you know, the officer's not investigating you for anything. And the law says that you are there by your own consent. Now, under those circumstances, you have no requirement to provide your identification, to tell the officer anything. You are perfectly free to turn around and walk away and say nothing. And that's exactly what I advise you to do. Now, that is only the law in about half the states. 24 states in this country have laws that say you must provide your identification when stopped by the police. Now, they usually have some sort of qualification, like only when the police have reasonable belief that you are involved with a crime or blah, blah, blah. But how do you know whether they have that reasonable belief? And the law says you don't get to decide. They do. So Texas is one of the states where that's legal, and the United States Supreme Court recently upheld a law in Texas saying that the police could do that. They can force you in a consensual encounter to provide your identification. And that's true, again, in about half the states. Now, I am not a Texas attorney, but I do believe that that's a terrible precedent. It's a terrible decision on the part of the court. It is, in my view, patently unconstitutional, and it's violative of our rights to privacy as citizens. However, they're the Supreme Court. I'm not. Now you know. In Virginia, you have no such requirement. Such laws come up, or proposals for such laws come up, almost every couple of years. Somebody proposes it, somebody who thinks they're going to do the police a favor, when in fact it should be the citizenry that they're helping out. And thank God, so far, the legislature has always declined to enact such a law. Let's hope it keeps up. All right, so what is the next type of encounter? The next type of encounter is not so consensual. It's what's known under the law as a Terry stop, from the Supreme Court case of Terry v. Ohio. And that's when the police come up to you and they are investigating a crime, and it's quite clear that they are, and they have done what's known as an investigatory detention. That is to say, you're not under arrest, but you're not free to leave, which is, of course, a complete legal lie. There's no other words for that. Courts know it, you know it, police know it, lawyers know it. We all know it's a lie, but the courts are going to stick to it anyway. So when you're in that situation where the officer wants to talk to you and you're not free to leave, but you're not technically under arrest, are you required to identify yourself? And again, the answer, at least in Virginia, is no. There is no requirement to identify yourself. Now, let me be clear. You absolutely cannot lie to the police. You cannot say, I'm somebody else. It happens all the time. I represent people almost every week who have misidentified themselves to the police. It's a dumb idea. Don't do that. They're going to figure it out. However, you are not required to give them your actual identity. All right, so maybe the most contentious issue is, what about when the police actually have you under arrest? Do you have to tell them your name when you're under arrest? Well, I did some digging on this. I did some investigation because the law wasn't clear, at least not to me, and it wasn't clear to any attorney I spoke to. But I found again and again and again on the web assurances that if you're under arrest, you absolutely have to identify yourself. Well, guess what? It ain't so. The law does not exist in Virginia. There's no case law on that, and there's no statute that says you have to identify yourself when you're arrested. I think it'll be a very interesting case. I don't recommend that you go that route, but be aware that you have an absolute right under the Fifth Amendment to shut your mouth and keep it shut. You do not have to identify yourself to the police. I hope this helped. If you have any questions about this or any other topic, please feel free to give me a call. Have a great day.